This is Create the Next from ProCFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome back to Create the Next. I'm Chris Bentliff, and Philippe Touzot is with us today. And Philippe, it's your first time here at Create the Next. And one of the things that I love about our series of conversations and our discussions is when we hit, I especially love when we hit the actionable, practical, tactical kind of stuff that helps us as business leaders and as executives and as owners or whatever our role to do something different at the end of our conversation than we might have been doing before. And I love our topic today, which is the art and science of revenue forecasting. So I feel like that's like everybody get your pencils out because that's a good one to kind of keep some notes on. So welcome. And let's start with, I guess, talk us through or give us some guidance or your expert insights on what is the foundation of good revenue forecasting processes. Where do we start? Where do we make sure everything is stable before we kind of can start to get creative with anything else?
So thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me and looking forward to our conversation today. So yeah, always tricky when we're trying to predict the future, right? And that's a little bit what we're trying to do here. But with a good rigorous process, we can arrive at a good revenue forecast, certainly the best that we could arrive at. So solid foundation. First, it's this idea of a bottom-up process, right? Where we're going to collect information at the most granular level across the whole organization, segment by segment, line of business by line of business, product by product, region by region, and collect all the relevant data and information regarding revenue projections, and then work with that and then consolidate this information to prepare a consolidated picture for the organization. So that's the first pretty essential concept. Obviously, it is super important to get direct information and direct input from the people that are on the front line, right? So that the sales managers, the client directors, the client leads, the people that deal directly with potential clients and prospects, or that will have first-hand information regarding and any parameters that will affect future revenue streams. So getting that direct input is essential. Another important aspect, obviously, is leveraging historical data, right? So having a good understanding of trends, of seasonality, of patterns, things that may be applicable, that may apply again for future time periods, and help that and use that to inform future projections. And then I would say last but not least is the cadence, right? Because if we want to keep the finger on the pulse, we really need to repeat that process as frequently as possible. And I would say for most businesses, that's probably monthly at least. And in some cases, it'll be more often than that. It'll be several times a month, maybe weekly even. So I would say that would be a good starting point, hitting on those ideas.
Do you find that, and obviously every organization is different, every business, every vertical, every industry, whatever, but as you're kind of indicating these things, here are some of those foundational aspects. Is there a place where you continually see, especially small and mid-market businesses, this is the thing to please stop doing? Like, do you see this is a problem again and again? Or if everybody could just do this one thing, everything else would be smoother? Like, what is a common sort of obstacle or how are we constantly stubbing our toes from where you see that?
So one common error is it can be tempting to take some shortcuts, right? Maybe due to a lack of time and resources. And because this can be a bit of a heavy lift, this whole process, it can be tempting to, recycle information that was collected for a previous forecast and not revisit all the details. And that may lead to, us missing new development or changes that affect the assumptions that are the basis for the forecast. So that's one common error. Another one is when we have, say, sales managers or client leads whose job it is to drive revenue and who presumably will probably have some targets to hit. If those people detect some softness in their numbers, they might be reluctant to report that. And it's human nature, right? I mean, they know this will probably trigger some hard discussions with management. Maybe they're not prepared to have those discussions at that moment in time. Maybe they're not ready for that. And look, it's hard, right? I mean, we're trying to predict a future that hasn't happened yet. And by the way, a future that we can influence. So it can be tempting for someone to say, or to think, I maybe only have a 5 or 10% chance of hitting those numbers, but I don't want to be perceived like I'm throwing the towel, so I'm going to stick to that. And there's a lot of good things there, but the problem is that can lead to a forecast that's overstated, especially if that pattern is repeated in various segments across the organization.
That is a really great point, and for me leads to a whole other discussion that I hope you and I can have sometime, which is around, outdated metrics and things that don't often help the organization, which is one is like this punitive sort of mindset of if you don't hit quota, then, instead of we just need to know everybody so that we can make sense of things. But that's a different topic. On the flip side of that, though, I have existed alongside organizations before where leaders who aren't necessarily studying the metrics, who aren't necessarily financial experts, have too rosy of a perspective of things, and because they had, they'll put a deal as 60% closed because they had one interesting conversation. Like they'll have an idea that things are going to be a lot better than they are, and they'll start to resource around that. Do you find that that's a constant or a common issue?
Yes, that's something that we can find on a pretty regular basis. I think it's a matter of making sure we're not being overly optimistic. I think there's something really important here. Is a culture of candor.
Yeah.
And making sure that we cultivate a culture of candor to make sure that we bring in the information as it is, that we don't embellish it, that we don't delay the news that is not as good as we were hoping it would be. And that's an essential idea, that if we can have a culture of candor, that means people being comfortable, reporting what they see, the good news, the not so good news, and address, all those situations, and asking the right questions. That will help, building a picture that is accurate, that makes sense, and identify that situation that you were telling, where something is reported in a way that is maybe overly optimistic.
I love that phrase, culture of candor. That is fantastic, and I think we should address that at some point. It's such a healthy way of thinking about things. What other, and we've kind of talked about this this opacity that can happen, and not, very rarely intentionally. It's just kind of the way things sometimes can go without us checking in. What are some other challenges or obstacles that can get in the way of our revenue forecasting?
Well, I think this idea that at some point updated forecasts get confused with targets. I think targets are targets, and an updated forecast is not necessarily a target. I mean, it serves a different purpose. And if an updated forecast shows, reports favorable development, numbers that are ahead of expectations, then great. However, if they report numbers that are, if it shows a gap, then that should trigger a conversation. Okay, how do we get back to target? What can we do in reaction to that? But that conversation will only take place if people are being candid and the softness is reported in the first place. And if that's not the case, then number one, the conversation won't take place, and number two, we have a forecast that is inflated.
That is fascinating, because in my experience, there can be a tendency to refuse to revise targets even if the revenue, if the forecast is feeling a little bit softer or weaker than we anticipated. The problem must be we're not working hard enough. The problem must be we're not doing something enough. So everybody double down, get out there harder. Maybe market dynamics or competition or something has changed, or just the economy, whatever. But what's your position on that? How do we, and I think this gets a little bit into whose voices should be in the room guiding this stuff, but how do we align targets? As you pointed out, they're distinct, and we should keep them distinct, but how do we align targets and revenue, especially if we're adjusting it as we go? Do you have a perspective on do targets change as well, or should we be constantly sort of, let's create those stretch targets that are hard but maybe capable, or how do we start to respond and flex in that?
Well, I think that it starts by making sure people understand, right, that forecasts and targets are different, and that we start the discussion with okay, this is where we stand today in an objective manner. After that, the discussion becomes, how do we bridge if we are falling short of target, then, what can be done to get back to target? Does a revised target need to be, finalized? It's possible. It depends on the situations. We want to be careful here, because, it's the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That if we keep, if times are hard and we're dealing with headwinds, and there is softness, and we keep, changing the target, then ultimately, we're essentially reacting to some, to a difficult situation, and not rather than finding, solutions and what can be done. Let's do everything that we can do to get back to where we want it to be. But it starts by, not being in denial, not avoiding the hard conversations, seeing the facts as they are, the reality as it is, and recognizing that. And once we have that, we are in a better position to see, okay, now what can be done? What can we do? If that is not truly reported to begin with, then we're not going to have that conversation.
Which, by the way, connects back to how often we should be doing this. It's a lot easier to have these conversations, I think, monthly, where we can sort of see the dynamics of things and we can make adjustments, rather than, well, everybody, it's October and we're way off, and how are we going to buckle down in the fourth quarter? The closer we are to these numbers, the more nimble we can be, the more agile we can be with our decision making. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it also plays with the idea of candor. Is that I think the more often you have the conversation on a regular basis, it will help instilling this culture of candor within the organization. More transparency, more trust, better communication. If you only have the discussion, a few times a year, it can be harder.
Who should be having this conversation? Talk me a little bit through the roles. When is it a matter of kind of, this is the executive team? When is it a matter of, let's open it up to maybe the management team? When do we open it up to the, those of us who are going to be making the impacts, the rank and file, or how does that work, or who should do what in this whole alignment?
So that's a great question, because obviously the process requires a lot of teamwork and a lot of collaboration, right? We talked about, collaborating with the sales teams, the marketing people, obviously the finance team. But at the end of the day, someone needs to own the process, and probably more importantly, someone needs to own the forecast. Mm-hmm. And that person should be the CFO. And when I say own the forecast, I mean literally be, ready to sign their name on that forecast. And for a lot of reasons, right? there's room for a lot of subjectivity, as we discussed in this process. The CFO needs to be the most objective person in the room. Make sure that all the discussions, the important discussions take place, that all the right questions are asked, that all the verifications are done, that the data is analyzed, that if there are assumptions that are not realistic, that are too optimistic, that this has been identified. So there's a lot of work to be done, and some of that is just analytical work, right? Looking at run rates, future run rates. If you see the old, the proverbial hockey stick, in your future projections, then we should pause and try to understand. Okay, what is driving that? Is it seasonality or anyway? So there's a lot of work that has to be done, and that should be led by the CFO and her or his team, and really, like I said, own it. Because if you could say, okay, it's teamwork, which means a lot of people have contributed to the forecast, and maybe every person owns their piece, right? But if everybody owns it, then no one owns it.
Right.
So and a process where there is room for that much subjectivity, it makes a lot of sense to let one senior person own the process, orchestrate the process, and own the outcome.
And we've talked on Create the Next here a zillion times about the value of a strategic CFO. So you're not part of what you're sort of articulating for me is you're not just asking somebody to sort of put the numbers together and then throw them on the table and say, okay, team, what do we do? This is a person who can then say, here's the numbers and here's what I think. Here's a way for us to address this. Here's a problem that I can see that we need to, and that could get into some of the things we talked about. We're not getting honest numbers, everybody. What are we going to do? Like when you have a jump start on the solution, because you've got the strategic mind who can see all this stuff and then say, here's an action item, everybody, or here's a way forward, or let me start the conversation. I mean, that's what we need, right? That's what we want. That's what the decision makers, we're not just looking for, give me more information, but what do we do with it? And I feel like the CFO is the key sort of the component, the crucial component to make that happen.
Yep, agreed. Obviously, it requires, deep knowledge of the organization, and a deep knowledge of all the parameters that drive the future sales. But that's the CFO's role, and the CFO should own the process here.
Philippe Touzot is a principal over here at ProCFO Partners. What a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to our next one. You said a couple of things today that made me think, I'd like to talk more about that and more about that and more about that. So thanks for all of your guidance and your generosity with your expertise today. And I think we learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to knowing more as time goes on and having you back.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.